Hello everyone, it is time for Splatoon 3 hot takes in the year of 2025. I asked you guys at the very end of last year to give your submissions. You know the drill by now. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy or consider becoming a member to help support me, and let's get started. Splatoon handles one-shot weapons so much better than probably any other shooter game on the market. Requires a decent amount of skill to land them without feeling impossible. Close-range weapons are extremely vulnerable if they miss, and long-range weapons give away their position. I think more shooters should incorporate sniper charging and laser reticle mechanics given how annoying they are in other games. There's a lot to unpack in this take. I think probably the more agreeable part for me is I think charging for snipers and laser reticle mechanics are pretty useful, and I definitely think those are great ways of balancing long-range weapons. In terms of one-shots, Splatoon definitely has a lot of one-shots, but I think something that makes them feel less extreme is just how crazy fast the kill times are in this game in general. I think somewhere near half the weapons in the game can kill you in under half a second, and there are some weapons that can kill you so quickly, like the 52 gal for instance, or Dapples in its turret mode, that basically feel the same as one-shots anyway. But I do think the one-shot weapons are generally well balanced with having decent flaws. Typically the shorter range ones via speed, and the longer range ones via the stuff we just talked about. Is it better than any other shooter game on the market? I wouldn't know though. And I still think weapons like long range chargers have a bit of balance work that needs to be done. But I will say it's in a pretty good spot. And again, given how many there are in the series, they could be much more annoying than they actually are. The live service style mechanics of rewarding daily logins and wins and requiring you to play constantly to finish the catalogs are a major factor in the average player feeling burnt out from the game. While they do help keep the player base more active, doing something because you feel like you have to and not because you want to leads to you getting sick of it. Personally, catalogs were never really something I focused. I played the game enough to complete them regardless. But for the average player, I think that, yeah, it could have been a bit too much. I think they tried to alleviate this in the second part of it by having catalog items be available later. But in my opinion, I think things that weren't gotten in the catalog should have just been available in the shops later. I think that's a good way to have an incentive to complete the catalog, but it means if you don't feel like grinding the game, you don't have to and you're not going to miss out on anything permanently, which would be a lot better of a compromise. Splatoon 3 definitely suffers from a lot of FOMO in general, and while I think the catalog is a good idea on paper, it needs to be done in a way that doesn't exclude people who don't play the game a lot. I think another idea I heard is that in Marvel Rivals, their Battle Pass doesn't actually expire ever. You can take as long as you need to complete it. I would like that idea as well. That's another way of working around it if you don't want to put it in the shops. At the end of the day though, I think it probably helped keep the scene active in the first year or so, but once people got burnt out, it probably contributed to a harsher drop-off than was previously. The seasonal system for updates was a good way of doing it. The problem was the lack of content in each update. Now personally, I agree with this. As much as having a second kit drop every week or so like it was in Splatoon 2 is nice on the content side of things, I think having these bigger updates are a bit better. Personally, I think that either the seasons needed to be a little bit larger, or if they wanted to stay their current size, should have been every 2 months. But of course, that's asking for a lot there. That being said, I think just the addition of more kits every season would have done a lot to make them feel more impactful, and considering how good the last season in the game was, they didn't have to do more content if the content they put in the game was of a higher quality. At the end of the day though, I agree that I don't think the seasonal update was a bad thing, it was just how it was handled. The fans obsessing over Splatoon 4 coming out is already really weird, considering that we already had a series refresh. It feels inevitable that we'll get another situation where people call the game Splatoon 3.5. I've gotten varying degrees of comments about covering Splatoon 4, and what I want to say is that speculative content and being excited for things that could happen that require another game are great, but of course I don't want people to move on from Splatoon 3 too fast because I think Splatoon 3 has a lot of potential, and I personally don't want to see it end as soon as possible and to jump to the next game. As much as the content side would absolutely love the next game coming out as soon as possible, I think it's better for the game as a whole and for the scene that we have more time with Splatoon 3, which is in a pretty good spot, and Splatoon 4 comes out when it's late enough. But in terms of people talking about it, I don't think it's a big issue to let people speculate and have fun thinking about what could happen in the next game. Splatoon 3 is an issue with sub and Special Bloat. Several end up being generally unwanted due to filling a role that another of its kind does, but better. This also ties into the issue of the current kit system and balancing all of these options. I don't really agree with this personally. I've been of the opinion that there's too few kits instead of too few specials. I think having subs and specials that are more similar to each other is totally fine, because then the smaller differences can shine if designed properly, or perhaps the small differences can allow them to have better synergy with certain weapon options. So I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but it does make it more difficult to balance, and that is harder to deal with. The Amiibos are nowhere near worth the insane price tag. There needs to be more stuff to do with them than just gear sets, fresh fits, and pictures. They should totally bring back the really cool hero mode challenges from Splatoon 1 to make them better. While I totally agree with this and would love to see that, is it really worth the dev time to make hero mode style challenges for how many Amiibo do we have right now? Oh yeah, that much. I don't think Amiibo are really just a huge priority these days, and Splatoon mostly just keeps it around as a legacy feature, and they have continued to add to it with other Amiibo, obviously, but I'm not too sure what they could do with it. The other idea, though, that could get around this would be having the Amiibo add some kind of challenges like before, but rather than them being different, they would just have, like, the same challenges, I guess, if you only had one of the Amiibos. I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to tell what they should do with Amiibos in the next game. But hey, at least you could change the main abilities on them finally. I think most of the hate that Splatoon 3 gets comes from the fact that we're playing the game now, and once S4 comes around, it'll be looked at a more positive light, like Splatoon 1 and 2. Similar to how people hated Splatoon 2 at the time, but look more fondly back on Splatoon 1. I mean, yeah, it's a lot easier to criticize the game you're currently playing. It's a lot easier to have problems with it, but I think there's another factor to this, which is that a lot of the Splatoon 2 player base is transferred to Splatoon 3, which means these are people with more experience in the franchise, and of course, the more time you tend to put into a certain game, the more you'll be able to recognize the flaws of it. So it might also just be that players are recognizing more of the issues than they did back in Splatoon 2. Obviously, this happened from S1 to 2 as well, but it's a little bit different because Splatoon 1 was on the Wii U, whereas for Splatoon 3, the majority of people playing it probably also had Splatoon 2, given the sales numbers. Splatoon 2's hero mode had the best premise of being able to use different weapons for every level. I disagree with this, and I'll tell you exactly why. I think the level design was limited by the fact that it had to be built around 9 different weapons with varying different mechanics. Personally, I think having 3 weapons picked for each one, that could be different ones throughout the entire series, allow you to build levels around those mechanics. There are plenty of examples of levels in Octo Expansion or Hero Mode that only work for a few weapons, and if you're trying to have a level where you can use pretty much every weapon for that level, then you can't really do as many creative things with them. It also obviously made 1000% absolutely horrible. I would know, I did it with all 9 weapons. Pants should have their own shop and gear abilities. Now this is a maybe for me, because currently it feels like there is a ton of gear dependency, and also having like 4 mains and 12 sub-abilities is way too much. But if the gear system gets a bit of an overhaul, I could see something like 4 main abilities and 8 subs being a lot better. That would be way less of a grind to get, and more importantly, a lot of main exclusive abilities are taking slots these days, and so having an extra main ability might actually help with the gear freedom a bit, and that could allow you to cut back on the subs a little bit. It also makes it less likely that abilities will overlap for the same thing, such as all the shoe exclusives being basically irrelevant because stealth jump is also on shoes. Personally, I really like the 4 and 2 system a lot better than the 3 and 3 one we have now, but of course we'd have to see it. With that being said, that's all the hot takes we got time for. Thank you all so much for submitting, and I hope you enjoyed the video.